In this video, I share with you an update on some of my City of Firwood 3D printable terrain. But before we get into that, I want to share with you about the GGGG. Each month, Bob the Beholder picks some of my Patreon supporters, and for this past month, February of 2022, Bob chose 4 of my Patreon supporters to receive $25 credits towards my merch store. That was James, John J, Colin G, and Will M. And then Max P was chosen by Bob to receive $100 to go towards the Deep Rock Galactic Kickstarter. For this month of March of 2022, we're going to have a printed and painted Aztec dice tower from Mythic Roll. We have an all-in pledge for the current Flatline City 2 Kickstarter. And we have 2 all-in pledges for Dungeoneers. I did a video for that. If you want to check that out, go ahead and check it out here. And I have links in the descriptions below for all of those current Kickstarters. If you want to get in on some of that, go ahead and use the link below to go to my Patreon page, and you can find out more information there, and we will be updating that GGGG list as we go along. So this is the 3rd video that I've done for the City of Firwood 3D printable buildings, and I have done 4 more to add to my collection. And again, I have talked in the past about how I really like the style of these buildings that Raphael has made. And this was a Kickstarter, but you can currently purchase these buildings right now on My Mini Factory. Again, use the links below if you're interested. But I just love how stylized this is, and especially the roof line is sloping. It isn't straight, and it looks really, really cool. I just love the style of these buildings. And I've chose to paint all of my roofs to be that blue that is similar to Warcraft. And I just really, really like how these buildings are turning out. Now, the 4 buildings that I'm adding to my collection is the windmill that's over here. I think it turned out really, really cool looking, and it's very unique. Not your traditional windmill. It does have this rotating piece right here on the side, but more interestingly is this top piece that also rotates around. So I think that piece is unlike any windmill terrain piece that I've seen in the past. So super unique. And then also the witch hunt building here, which has a tree that's growing through it. I think that also is really unique, and it adds a little bit of a different color in the midst of this sea of blue roofs. I just like how these leaves have turned out on this piece. Then we also have the weapons store, which again is a unique piece just with some of the sculpts here, this boar's head or whatever pig's head that is on the roof line. And again, I just think that all of the buildings that Raphael has come out with are really distinct from one another, and yet have the same style that holds all of the pieces together. So again, you have this really cool sloping roof line, and with the weapon store, you have this unique sculpt where you have this center sort of roof line that is flanked by these 2 smaller ones off to the side. But I feel like the centerpiece so far out of all of my pieces is the sawmill, which has the most number of pieces and is one of the largest ones so far. I just love how distinct it is. I love that it does have an actual blade right here on the bottom floor. It has some of these ironworks for this steam pipe engine that is powering the saw. And just from every angle, it just looks really unique. So this building is one of my favorites out of the entire set because it just has so many pieces to it. And if you look at this table full of buildings, each one of these buildings is really distinct from one another. And make sure you do check out my previous videos for City of Firwood, where I do highlight some of these other pieces here in the back. But really, really like these 4 buildings that I painted up this past week. Again, using the painting tutorial from the very first video, I'm using the same method with one small change. Instead of painting the stone on these 4 pieces up here, a spray paint of gray, I actually spray painted and primed everything with the dark brown, because I found that the difference between the dark brown and the dark gray isn't that much, and I bet many of you didn't even notice that I didn't color the stonework with the dark gray. It's actually the same dark brown that's around all of the wood as well. And so that just is a little bit of a time saver with the results looking pretty much the same as all of the other buildings, previous buildings, where I did paint all of the stone with a dark gray primer instead. So you can still use that method, but I just found that to cut some time and create a little bit more efficiency in painting. Also, most of the pieces printed out without any supports. This piece over here with the windmill, I did need to create some supports right here on this spot in order for that bridge to be able to print. Otherwise, my first print failed because that section right there fell off of the plate. So make sure you do put a little bit of support there when you're printing out this big roof piece. Also, when you're slicing, check the first layer, because I can't remember which piece it was, but one of the pieces had an artifact, so it was lifted off the plate where the first layer was actually not adhering. So with any of your 3D prints that you slice, I always check the first layer, and all I had to do was slice off maybe 0.2 millimeters, that very first layer, in order for it to actually print on the plate. So just double check. Other than that, all of these pieces printed really, really nicely, didn't have any problems. And as I mentioned in some of my previous videos, I actually do glue a lot of the pieces together, especially the roof pieces, in order so that when I lift them off, they lift off all as one piece rather than a bunch of separate pieces. But your mileage may vary and you can do whatever you want. There's a lot of flexibility. I don't paint my interiors, and you're going to see that with the close-up shots, because I actually don't go inside of buildings with my war games. They're basically functioning on the tabletop as obstacles. Now, if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons or other RPGs, which I feel like these buildings are perfect for because they're larger, there is a lot of interior space that you can use. But for my sake, I don't bother to paint the insides because I never actually put miniatures on the inside of these buildings. Up to this point, I have printed out everything that has come out from Raphael for this Kickstarter campaign, except for 2 buildings. And that is, I haven't printed out the stable, nor have I printed out the general store. The stable I didn't print out because the roof is all hay, and it would be really different than all of these other buildings. There is a little bit of hay on the Witch's Hunt building, and I might still end up painting that out, but I sort of like all of these blue tiled roof buildings instead. And the general store, I'll probably still print it out at some point, but right now I really like these 4 buildings that I most recently printed out. And I'm really looking forward to, there are 3 more buildings left for Raphael to fulfill the rest of what was promised in the Kickstarter. And that is the Thieves Guild, the Observatory, and then finally the inn, which is going to be massive. I mean, that thing looks huge. All of these buildings are much more larger than most of my other 3D printed buildings, so I can't imagine how huge that inn is going to be. So I will come up with a final City of Firwood video that does showcase the rest of those 3 buildings once they do come out, and then I will show you what it looks like actually on an entire tabletop, because right now these are all crammed together. I mean, these buildings are plenty to fill out my 4-foot by 4-foot space for any kind of war game. In fact, it's probably a little bit too much terrain. But I do want to finish out, and like I mentioned before in a previous video, I actually like the fact that I didn't receive all of these STL files all at once, because there's no way I would have printed these out. But because Raphael has been feeding it to us piecemeal, every couple of months he's coming out with a building, because it's almost like a subscription service, I've been able to keep up and have been motivated to print each one of these out. Whereas a lot of other Kickstarters where I received, dozens of files all at once, I haven't printed out any of them. So in some ways, I feel like this sort of slow turnout of STL files actually makes it manageable for me to be able to print them out. But you have access to all of these files now, so go ahead again, use the links below to go to my mini factory if you want to purchase them. I didn't get any of the props or any of the miniatures or a lot of the smaller pieces that you might print off of a resin printer. I only bought the buildings. But overall, I am super happy and impressed with everything that has come out. Please like and subscribe. If you want to support my channel, go ahead and go to my Patreon page, or you can go to my merch store and purchase some of the cool merch that I have in my new store. Otherwise, happy printing, happy gaming. We'll see you next time.